Good afternoon. My name is Sonora Monks, ESA's Director of Programs and Education. Thank you for attending today's webinar titled Kicking the Tires on Order 841, Diving into Details, Opportunities, and Challenges. I'd like to remind everyone that today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available at www.energystorage.org. Participant lines will be muted throughout the webinar. However, we welcome your questions and comments, which can be submitted at any time via the chat box on the left side of your screen. Following today's webinar, you will receive a link to the recording and slides, as well as a brief survey regarding today's topic and topics for future webinars. Your feedback will ensure that ESA continues to provide the highest value information to you and your company. Today's speakers are Jason Berwin, Vice President of Policy at the Energy Storage Association, Mike Berlinski, Director of Emerging Technologies at Customized Energy Solutions, and Judy Chang, Principal at the Brattle Group. But before we begin our presentation, I'll turn it over to Kelly Speaks-Backman, who is Chief Executive Officer of the Energy Storage Association, for a few brief opening remarks. Kelly?
Thank you, Sonora. And I just wanted to say hello and welcome and thank you all for joining our webinar on FERC Order 841, which was approved unanimously last month. Order 841 was a landmark ruling directing regional market operators to allow energy storage resources to compete fully in the wholesale markets. There are lots of estimates. We've got a great panel lined up for us within the next hour or so. But now that the order is out, I just wanted to let you all know that our work is just beginning. We're going to be continuing this work through the planning and implementation phases, and we begin that work today with this webinar. Jason Berwin, who is our VP of Policy here at ESA, will kick us off, but I wanted to take this opportunity to let you know that this conversation is at its early stages. We invite you to continue your engagement in this as this new regulatory construct is developed, beginning with your attendance next month at our 28th Annual Conference and Expo, which is April 18th through 20th in Boston. We're going to be having keynote addresses from Governor Charlie Baker of Massachusetts, Commissioner Judith Judson of the DOER, Steve Coughlin, CEO of the newly formed Fluence Energy, Gil Quinones, the CEO of NYPA, and Noel Zamont, the Revitalization Coordinator of the Federal Oversight and Management Board for Puerto Rico. For those of you who are on the line today who are members and are attending ANCON, you can also join us for an in-person members-only strategy session on Wednesday, April 18th from 1 to 3 at the annual conference. We're going to be working with members on our strategy for engagement of the RTOs and ISOs as they craft their compliance filings for Order 841. We'll send a link out after this webinar to RSV for the meeting. So for now, you'll hear no more from me and get to the real meat of the matter. And so with that, I turn it over to Jason. Thanks again for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Can you all hear me all right? Just wanting to make sure that folks can hear me as I jump into today's presentations with you all. I think this is going to be a really great lineup. First, I'm going to lead off here by talking about the significance at a broad level of what Order 841 does. After that, I'll be turning it over to Mike Berlinski to go over the good, bad, and things to be determined in Order 841, really diving into those details. After that, Judy Chang from Brattle Group will be talking about sizing the market after Order 841, and then I'll wrap up with some of the next steps forward. So without further ado, Order 841 is a big deal. And the reason it's a big deal is really, I'd say, three main pieces here. The first is that, and this is the obvious one, is that it creates a clear legal framework for storage resources to operate in the electric markets. And to not put too fine a point on that, these regional wholesale markets in the United States cover a significant amount of the electric territory in the U.S. We're not talking about just making sure one or two markets work, but all of the markets that are regulated by the Commission work. This, of course, also means we are expanding the universe of solutions that can compete to meet electric system needs, not just, of course, the fact that you have storage, but also, and as we'll get into further, having smaller scale resources be a part of that as well. And finally, 3, that Order 841 really represents necessary steps, multiple steps, on the path to a more flexible electric system. Really, the things that are in here are, I would say, the seeds of a lot of what will, in future years, be the foundation for flexible grid operations. So that is a really key set of reasons why you should be paying attention to this. Very briefly, in terms of understanding the timeline of these things, we see that the change in wholesale markets with respect to storage happens slowly, but even if it's important, it will eventually take a bit of time to get there. As this chart notes, and I won't drive through it for you all, but you can review it later, this all started really back in November 2015 when the Commission first started taking a strong look at storage, partly driven by the fact that the rapid cost declines in battery storage really put this on the radar for the Commission. It took 2.5 years for that to ultimately turn into an order, which was issued last month, and the compliance filings for Order 841 are due at the end of this year, in December 2018, and that implementation, as outlined in the order, would not be set until end of 2019. And even thereafterwards, there will be other things which I will mention afoot. So this is all turning a large ship over time. And again, I'm not going to go deeply into it, but the reason FERC saw it important to issue Order 841 was really about not just removing the barriers to storage, which of course is of interest to our industry, but also about enhancing competition in the market, making sure that just and reasonable rates are produced for electric service, which competition of the widest array of assets is a requirement for. And finally, and I think of interest, and perhaps portending where this Commission presently may go, also noting the importance of storage for resilience in the bulk power system. This order does look at electric storage. So when FERC says electric storage resources, they're talking about something that takes electrons in and puts electrons out. And so it's not referring to storage that delivers energy as a heating and cooling service. That would be still participating as a demand response asset. I also would therefore seem to exclude non-exporting behind the meter, that is to say customer-sited energy storage. If that storage is purely modifying loads, it would also be participating as demand response. But otherwise, electric storage does include not only batteries, but non-battery technologies like pumped hydro, compressed air flywheels, and it doesn't differentiate by location on the grid. At a high level, and we'll dive into these in just a minute with Mike Berlinski from Customized Energy Solutions, Order 841 is telling the RTOs you must have a participation model for electric storage. That is to say, a set of tariff amendments and also presumably business practice manual changes and software changes that allow storage to effectively participate. So first you've had generation resources, then you have demand-side resources, and FERC is saying, here's another thing that doesn't fall into either of those buckets that needs its own participation model, electric storage resources. And in the order, number 1 of the 5 sections, storage is supposed to be eligible to provide all capacity, energy, and ancillary services that the resource is technically capable of providing. Section 2 is about accounting for the physical and operational characteristics of storage resources, which I think is particularly important and a high level of detail that we will get into, but ultimately means actually modeling storage as storage operates. 3, reducing the minimum size requirements for participation down to 100 kilowatts. 4, having storage be able to set wholesale market clearing processes with both a wholesale seller and buyer, which is really sort of premised on ensuring consistent price formation in the markets. And 5, clarifying storage will be paying wholesale LMP for energy used for charging. That these withdrawals from the electric system for anything that's participating as a wholesale electric storage resource, that charging energy is not a load, it is a sale for resale at LMP. And again, I want us to get to the meat of this, so I'm going to just very briefly display here. This has an impact. This is going to require the ISOs to do things based on where they currently are now, whether that's because, like SPP, they don't have an actual mechanism for storage to participate as storage. It has to register as a generator and a load. Whether it's something like MISO that only allows storage right now to participate in one market, frequency regulation, or whether it's really helping to push forward the process as it is doing in New York ISO. But with that, I'm going to turn over to my good friend, Mike Berlinski at Customized Energy Solutions. Mike?
Great. Thanks, Jason. Hi, Mike Berlinski here. So I first want to start just with an introduction to Customized Energy Solutions so folks know where we're coming from and why we should be speaking about this very important FERC order. So CES is an energy consulting firm, been around for about 20 years. We have over 150 staff working in these variety of 8 or so market areas. We do have a global presence. But the group that I'm in, Emerging Technologies, really focuses on energy storage, and we've been deep in that market for a long time. I personally have been involved and on the front lines of energy storage policy analysis and development for 8 years, going back to the implementation of FERC Order 890, allowing non-generator resources to access the wholesale ancillary service markets, and then moving on to Order 755 and improving compensation for frequency regulation, and now with FERC Order 841. So we have over 120 megawatts of storage resources under management, and we really learn a lot from that market operation. We've been an advisor to ESA for many years. We've been recognized and honored with the Brad Roberts Award, and our offerings in a variety, but including market intelligence, project evaluation, and we do detailed bottom-up market sizing analysis. So I'm really all about energy storage, and I'm happy to talk about the details of Order 841 here. So we have 3 different categories here, really the good, the bad, and the to be determined from the order, with about a dozen items in each category. So I'll go through and highlight them and really try and help folks understand what the order means when it says what it says. So on the good side, really the headline, and this really could be just a summary of the order, is that it establishes a participation model that recognizes the physical and operational characteristics of storage resources. And that's really a key concept and in some ways an umbrella for a lot of the other pieces of the order. Now, really an important part is that it opens up all the market products to participation by storage resources. And we're talking capacity, energy, and ancillary services. And this is important because, as Jason gave an example, some ISOs have some participation models that limit storage resources to only certain market products like frequency regulation. Also very important, this order provides a lot of clarity around the market rules for storage that will really enable and improve market access. ISOs have to specify whether new or existing market participation agreements will be in effect, whether existing market rules apply to storage, including, and very importantly, the rules around providing capacity. Also, this explicitly allows storage resources to derate capacity to meet minimum runtime requirements, and that will enable them to provide more market products. And finally, really providing more clarity around derating capacity is not engaging in physical withholding. So the next set of items under the good is that it really improves dispatch flexibility and price formation, and that ISOs have to represent the physical and operating characteristics of storage through different ways, including bidding parameters or other means. And here we have the list of the bidding parameters that FERC recognized in the order. And you'll see later that really the implementation of these bidding parameters and how the software is determined really will determine how the storage resources will be utilized. So some of these items may straddle different buckets of the good, the bad, and the to be determined. Also, just as important as the bidding parameters is giving storage resources the right to manage their own state of charge. Now, it's important to note that the order explicitly says that storage will be able to be dispatched and can set the wholesale market price as both a wholesale seller and a wholesale buyer. And this really recognizes that unique capability of storage resources to go both positive and negative, charge, discharge, inject, withdraw. There's different ways to describe that capability. And here it's described as a wholesale seller and wholesale buyer. Also clarify that storage can participate as a price taker and is eligible for make-whole payments. Again, this clarification will be helpful. So the third slide here starts with improving market access for distributed resources, and this is really key to allow participation for resources as small as 100 kilowatts. Now, I personally have experience with developers who were developing resources that were under the minimum size threshold in some markets, like 1 megawatt. And when you're under 1 megawatt, that threshold seems very high. So this should improve market access. And then also focusing on ensuring that the charging energy will be priced appropriately. This states that the energy from the ISO to the storage resource that's resold back will be charged at the wholesale locational marginal price, and that is to distinguish it from retail energy rates and from nodal prices, or sorry, from zonal prices. So we're talking about LMPs or nodal prices, not zonal energy prices. Also, conversion efficiency losses will also be settled at the wholesale price. They're not a component of on-site load or station power. Also, on the distributed side, those resources cannot be forced to pay twice for the same charging energy, meaning will not be paying both the retail rate for energy for a kilowatt hour as well as the wholesale rate for that same kilowatt hour. And also on the good side here is there was a statement how storage should not be charged transmission charges when dispatched by the ISO to provide a service. Now on to the bad, what's interpreted by the industry as unfortunate but deterministic parts of the order. First, there's a large amount of flexibility given to ISOs on many points. And it is possible that ISOs can make minimal changes or make changes that really do not help storage and try to achieve compliance with that proposal. And some ISOs may try to avoid creating or establishing a single storage asset registration type, which the industry believes is a best practice. It also does not modify the performance requirements for providing capacity. So FERC did not go so far as to change the rules around the ISOs that have capacity performance markets with open-ended duration requirements for the provision of capacity. And also, there was not an agreement to change the minimum runtime requirements or must-offer requirements that generally apply to resources. And some other market design elements seem to remain stuck in the traditional generator model. FERC declined to remove requirements that storage resources have an energy schedule to provide ancillary services, even though some ISOs already do not require this. FERC declined to acknowledge this and promote it. And also, FERC did not require changes to the NERC reliability standards, glossary of terms, or other regional reliability standards, even though the industry has cited some barriers around that really related to resources such as non-synchronous technologies, even though they're technically capable of providing services like synchronized reserves or spinning reserves. So that really will remain a challenge. The next slide, really focusing on some issues for distributed storage resources are not addressed by this order. It does not explicitly allow net injections from behind the meter storage resources, and that was a big desire of the industry. It states that distribution utilities may assess a charge on resources connected at distribution voltage, and this is called a wholesale distribution charge. This was applied in one case by Commonwealth Edison to the Energy Vault project, and so this is a reconfirmation of that ability, and that would cause higher operating costs for a storage resource if a utility were to apply those charges. Also, while a storage resource cannot be charged twice for the same energy, it could be the case if a distribution utility can't net out the wholesale part and the ISO can't net out the retail part. It may be a situation of catch-22 where the distributed storage resource might not be allowed to participate in the ISO markets. So that is a concern. And then specifying that the energy paid is at the wholesale locational marginal price, that does not distinguish between front of the meter and behind the meter storage resources. So again, these, some of these are scheduled to be discussed and hopefully determined in the subsequent distributed energy resource docket and technical conference scheduled for next month. Next, specifically on the cost of energy side, storage is said to have to pay transmission charges when acting as load, even if sale for resale. And this could change the treatment in some regions, which would increase cost. And then energy purchases are at the nodal locational marginal price, explicitly not at the zonal price, and there may be some instances where the zonal price might actually be cheaper. So moving on to those items that are not yet determined whether they are good or bad, a lot of it really will depend on the compliance efforts of the ISOs. Again, each ISO has flexibility, so issues like the qualification criteria for a resource to be able to fall under the storage participation model, that is left to the ISO determination. And how the existing rules for must offer obligations and the ability to derate capacity to meet minimum runtime requirements, a lot of those details are left up to the ISO. And there is not an explicit discussion around multiple use storage resources. Now on the physical and operating characteristics of storage and the bidding parameters or other means, it is up to the ISO to determine what is mandatory or optional. And again, on the implementation side and the software side, a lot will be left up to the ISO. And then finally, each ISO has a lot of flexibility on the energy accounting and metering principles. Looking at whether directly integrated or other loads are a component of charging energy or station power is left up to the ISOs, and that could impact projects with high thermal management needs. The metering and accounting practices really need to address the complexities, and depending on how they are implemented, metering could be complex and costly. And then looking to account for wholesale versus retail transactions, again, a lot is left up to the ISO to determine how that will be done. And one item, again, that is considered a best practice is the ability to submeter a resource behind a retail meter, and that was not made explicit by FERC in the order. So again, that's left up to ISO. And then there's other hints at potential market power concerns, which is something that just folks should be aware of. But again, nothing explicit deterministic from FERC on that at this time. And that's it for me, and I'll turn it over to Jason to pick up and sort of give a sense of what these uncertainties mean. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely, Mike. And just for folks who are asking questions, we are seeing them, and we will get to questions in the question and answer after all of the prepared presentations. So don't worry, we're seeing them, and we will get to them. But yes, there are uncertainties ahead, obviously, with a lot of these to-be-determined pieces. And so I think that given the amount of latitude ISOs have, it really is incumbent upon the storage industry to get involved and to be informing these compliance efforts in discussions with RTO and ISO staff, particularly for those who are perhaps facing some of these issues for the first time. Certainly participating in the stakeholder meetings at the RTOs, and ultimately showing up at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission as appropriate to make sure that the intent of the order is being fulfilled with respect to compliance. And fundamentally, of course, for those of you who are members of the Energy Storage Association, coordination within ESA in terms of our policy activities and our engagements across the different stakeholder processes and RTOs. Another thing that I should also note on this note of uncertainty was that there were a number of requests for rehearing by different parties on Order 841, which were all filed late, well, I guess on March 16th. And those requests really, most of them are focused on concerns that FERC has overstepped its authority vis-a-vis state regulators regarding whether and how distribution-connected resources may participate in wholesale markets. And there are different sort of posed solutions or acts in those different motions for rehearing. I think the ones that are most common is there are parties seeking a regulatory authority to opt out of allowing distribution-connected storage assets to participate in wholesale markets, akin to the opt-out for demand response participation that was included in Order 719. Second, that parties seeking to prohibit DER storage from providing both wholesale and retail services, given the concerns over the regulatory authority with regard to rates and participation, as well as some concerns over distribution reliability. And finally, a wish from some parties to delay the requirements for Order 841 until more of the DER issues are sorted out in the separate but related DER docket. That's Rulemaking 18-9 for those of you keeping track at home. There are some other concerns not having to do with state and federal authority. Several parties asking for just more time for implementation overall, given the December 2019 final timeline. And at least amongst the California parties, of particular note, also looking to make sure that transmission charges not apply, given that that would in fact potentially be sending California in a different direction than that ISO has chosen to go in exempting charging energy from such transmission charges. There are also a number of requests for clarification on technical matters. We saw that from several ISOs. And looking at those, it certainly signals the interest of these RTOs in possibilities for compliance that may diverge with the order as written, and they're seeking to see if that is an avenue available from the Commission. Ultimately, FERC will rule on these motions for rehearing in the week of April 16th, and we, and I imagine other storage industry members and stakeholders, may be preparing answers to those motions to represent what we think are the issues that should support the Commission to keep moving with its unanimous decision in approving Order 841. Nonetheless, those details are something that we will also be covering in greater detail at the annual conference. But now it's my great pleasure to turn the microphone over to the folks at Brattle Group to talk a bit more about the opportunities for storage in the markets under Order 841.
Great. Thank you very much, Jason, Mike, and Sonora. It's my pleasure to be on this webinar with everybody. A brief introduction. My name is Judy Chang. I'm a principal with the Brattle Group. My office is in Boston. We have several offices across the North America. I have two colleagues of mine that assisted in putting together some of these slides, but also have been working very closely with me on storage analyses in general. And I believe Roger is on the phone, and Hannes is also participating. In general, we see lots of great opportunities for storage in the RTO market. Now, if implemented in the way that all the value streams can be captured, storage, electricity storage can be a very strong transformative force in the power system. And I think FERC's order acknowledges that this is well overripe to be dealt with at the wholesale market perspective. We have been working with many different stakeholders, both developers, investors, utilities, states, policymakers, as well as RTOs, in trying to understand the potential implications of storage on various different parts of the system. And one of the things that we have done recently is applying the analysis we've done previously in the Texas market to understand what the potential size of the market would be across the United States. Just focusing on the merchant wholesale market potential, which means this is just participation in the wholesale market, not yet taking into account the value proposition on the distribution system or behind the meter. We estimate about 7,000 megawatts of merchant energy storage could be profitably installed or invested across the U.S. RTO regions. Now, we have done this analysis assuming that the storage cost would drop to about $350 per kilowatt hours installed, and I believe all the industry projections have suggested that that's approximately the price or the cost in the 2020 timeframe, and some have said that they can produce installed storage projects at even lower cost. Now, previously, some storage have been built only capturing the value in the ancillary services market, and we do believe that that market is limited. Thus, I think FERC's action in this order acknowledges that, you know, the market potential is definitely larger than the ancillary services market, and therefore allowing storage to participate more holistically across the energy, ancillary services, and capacity market would really open up the opportunities for storage. And of course, the ultimate size of the market, meaning how much participation would actually occur and how large the market share would be for storage, will be highly dependent on the cost. But of course, that's also codependent with how much development will occur. So the more projects can be developed, the more the supply chain can be further developed, at least in North America and possibly across the globe, and the lower the cost would be, and therefore spiraling into further investment in storage. This slide suggests that looking at the value of storage really means that we should look beyond just the wholesale market. While the FERC order is extremely important, and it's a very important step forward, the overarching value that storage provides actually goes way beyond the current wholesale market services. So this slide talks about energy ancillary services and capacity market, but in addition, there are other wholesale market value streams that could be captured, such as flexibility. Some markets have already instituted flexibility products, but others haven't. But certainly storage can and will provide flexibility to the system. Environmental savings, to the extent that storage can capture and store clean energy and be able to use it at a time that it can offset emissions. Storage can provide environmental benefits. At the point, depending on where the storage is installed, storage can also defer transmission and distribution investments and reducing the overall cost to customers. And then, of course, ultimately customers increasing reliability by reducing outages, increasing engagement in the power supply, and ultimately behind the meter, customers can use storage to reduce their bills. All of these benefits need to be evaluated and assessed in a way that we can really understand the value proposition of storage across the grid. Adapting the work that we have done in the Texas market, where we said that approximately 5,000 megawatts or 15,000 megawatt hours would be profitable or would provide overall benefits to the Texas ERCOT market. By extrapolating the analyses we have done in the Texas market, we estimate about 50,000 megawatts U.S.-wide market for storage if all the value can be captured across the stream, just like depicted in the slide before this one. Certainly, as you heard from previous presenters, that the Order 841 is a step forward and it's a very important step forward. Stakeholders have raised some very good questions in response to the order. And just to summarize some of the things you have already heard, one thing that's central to the wholesale market is transmission charges. Transmission charge for energy used in charging storage, whether it's when it's providing services to the grid or when it's capturing energy arbitrage in the market. The interaction between federal and state oversight of distributed energy storage, much of that will be discussed again at the technical conference, but one can anticipate that there's quite a bit of issues that need to be resolved. Jurisdictions over behind the meter storage, as you can imagine, that much of the retail jurisdiction and policy making resides with the states. So while Order 841 pushes forward the wholesale market position on storage, much of the activities still reside with states, and much of the jurisdictions still reside with states. And to really push this forward and capitalize on all of the value streams, we really need to look at the wholesale and the retail market opportunities. Resolving the jurisdictional and the control issue would be critical to unlocking the full potential for storage across the grid. And we believe that it will be quite a bit of work, and good that ESA will be working with stakeholders to, navigate through the mazes that the order has created, but as well as moving the industry forward to accepting and to ensure that the marketplace is ready for energy storage participation. With that, I think I'm going to hand back to Jason.
Great. No, thank you, Judy. I appreciate that. And I'll just finish off and get us to our Q&A by talking about the next steps forward. We've done sort of at ESA an initial pass on where we see sort of the various levels of compliance and posture in the ISOs. Fundamentally, though, this is a high-level sort of first sweep impression. Fundamentally, I think that as we start talking to RTOs about what they're thinking about, we may have a better sense of exactly how much work is ahead. Either way, what's very important here is to recognize that as we are advocating directly in these processes and engaging with folks, we're developing those recommendations and strategies now. And as Kelly mentioned at the beginning of this call, those of you who are coming to the annual conference of Energy Storage Association, April 18th through 20th in Boston, we are having a members-only workshop to talk about the second part of this series on engaging the RTOs on Order 841, developing our recommendations and strategies for shaping compliance. So I highly encourage those of you who are coming to Boston, first of all, come to Boston and join us because of all the excellent content, but secondarily, those of you who are joining us, please join this session if you are an ESA member and work with us as we talk about not just the different recommendations, but also get into a bit more detail on some of the issues that have only been summarized here today. And with that, I will now start opening the Q&A. As you know, questions can be submitted through the chat box in your browser in the lower left-hand corner. We've already gotten quite a number. So I'll just start first by capturing a couple of quick questions that I think are questions for clarification on some of the stuff that was said earlier, Mike Berlinski. So someone asked, what is meant by derating capacity? Mike, do you want to very quickly answer?
Sure, thanks. So the deration of capacity is to get partial credit for capacity relative to the installed or nameplate capacity. And for storage, it really has to do with the energy capability or the duration capability of the resource. For example, some ISOs have a 4-hour duration requirement to provide capacity. So a 1-hour storage resource had not been eligible to sell any capacity in those ISO markets, and this FERC order will make it explicit that that resource can qualify at 1/4 of its installed capacity to meet that 4-hour runtime. And so that's the idea of derating, and that's really the benefit of this order.
Thanks, Mike. Another quick question on price taker. Question is, price taker on which side, buyer or seller or both?
Right, Jason, I'll take that, and it's on either side. So it's just a general ability, just again, clarification that a storage resource can function as a price taker, and separately FERC clarified that storage can function as both a seller and a buyer.
Thanks, Mike. So there's a question here, can you further explain the fact that Order 841 does not require net injection? How does this then actually impact behind-the-meter installations or the ability of behind-the-meter asset owners to take advantage of the order? I think I'll just take a crack at that and explain. It doesn't require RTOs to allow net injection from behind the meter. It doesn't block it either, and so RTOs can choose to go that route. Certainly we've seen things like the behind-the-meter net generation initiative in New York ISO and other discussions in different ISOs about allowing that kind of net injection. So it's simply that it does not prohibit it, but it also does not in any way require it with allowing behind-the-meter storage to participate. Moving on to the next question. Will there be further discussion on multiple use storage? Is that still on the table? So I'll just very briefly discuss two things there. The first is that there's multiple use as both generator services and as transmission reliability assets. That was something that FERC in a policy statement in early 2017, for those of you keeping track at home, that's PL 17-2, clarified FERC precedent that said there are not inherent barriers to storage providing both generator services and serving as a transmission reliability asset, and that fundamentally FERC outlined sort of a set of conditions that would need to be satisfied in order for that to be acceptable from the purposes of FERC. That is something that I think is incumbent upon either a storage asset manager and an RTO to present, but it's something that will have to come up from markets. As for multiple use storage that is both a, say, providing wholesale service and providing retail or end user services, that is on the table in the sense that yes, an energy storage resource type can participate in wholesale markets. So I don't think that that's somehow not countenanced, and in fact, it's precisely this multiple use capability that California has now recently issued its decision in January outlining its 11 sort of guidelines for how multiple use assets will operate to provide both retail and wholesale services. That said, as I mentioned, one of the motions for rehearing are on precisely this subject and looking to say that this is in fact not something that should be allowed, that a storage asset that is participating in wholesale markets should not be allowed to also do retail. So that is a question that we will see whether FERC ultimately decides to take on. All right, moving through the next questions. So Judy, this question for Judy from Brattle Group. Question is there a timeline on the $350 kilowatt installed assumption for storage?
We understand that the industry thinks that $350 per kilowatt hour is achievable by 2020. That's installed. Of course, it varies across technologies. We've also been hearing from developers and technology providers that they can go even lower than that. So in my mind, in a way, it's a bit of a price to beat for a 2020 timeframe.
Thank you, Judy. Another question for you. Are all of the values you are proposing coincident? In other words, can you provide ancillary services, energy arbitrage, capacity, and transmission deferment all at the same time in your analysis?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Our modeling platform is designed to make sure that when we evaluate the value of a certain battery storage project, whether it's on the distribution system or behind the meter, we don't double count the value. Meaning, if a battery storage, let's say all the way behind the meter, can simultaneously reduce demand charges for the customer and reduce distribution or deferred distribution investments and sell back in the wholesale market, then it would be modeled in such a way. But if such a battery, let's say on the distribution system, has to reserve itself to be able to discharge for particular events, then we actually simulated with a probability associated with such an event that has, for example, if there's a storm coming through and there's a high probability that there will be an outage and such storage is invested or deployed on the distribution system to avoid those kind of outages and to sustain power for customers, then those storage would have an operational profile with a probability assigned to that event such that it won't be able to react to provide the other services, for example, wholesale market services. So I think embedded in that question is, can they simultaneously provide all the benefits? Perhaps, but in the cases that they cannot, because they're constraining themselves, constraining the operations to make sure that they're available for certain events, then they should not be valued as if they were able to simultaneously capture all the value.
Great. Thank you, Judy. Another question here. Mike, I might answer and direct this to you as well. Are there specific battery technologies which would benefit from the requirements provided in Order 841, e.g. flow batteries? Just so folks are aware, this is, the parameterization is intended to allow all types of storage assets to participate, and it's not clear that there's any particular advantages represented by the order. The order is enabling and parameterizing, and ultimately the parameters will be determined by the technologies and what they're capable of. Mike, do you have any further thoughts on that?
No, I would agree that the specific structure of the order is very broad, all-encompassing for technologies, and really there's so many good pieces that the benefits should lift all technology boats that way. Thanks.
Great, thank you. There's another question here. This one might be both Mike and Judy. This is a question about what happens as markets saturate. The value of the storage for some purposes will be reduced as each incremental unit of storage comes online, right? Are there other services that storage can provide that will not saturate?
I'll start. So the idea of saturation can mean a couple different things, but in terms of markets with a fixed demand or procurement, they can be sensitive to supply. So theoretically, there is a potential for saturation, certainly smaller markets more so than larger markets. So even a 200,000 megawatt market can be saturated, but generally there's lots of different market products open to storage now. They all have different market sizes, and so I think this order really puts the industry beyond the old concerns over initial market saturation. So that's really one of the benefits of it.
Another way to answer that question is you're absolutely right. The person who asked the question is that, yes, eventually the incremental value per unit of storage could decrease and would decrease. The easiest example, in addition to, of course, ancillary services, which has a quantity requirement that ultimately might get saturated, but the easiest example is to think of energy arbitrage, right? Storage can store energy or absorb energy when prices are low and discharge that energy when prices are high, and capitalize on the price differential between the two time periods. Now, the more storage you place on a system, that activity will eventually increase the price during those low price periods and decrease the price of the peak price periods. So eventually the incremental value of storage will decrease over time as more storage gets added to the system. In other applications, though, if it is truly a behind-the-meter storage and the customer is using it to improve its power supply quality, to avoid outages, and to reduce customers' bill, those applications will be sized accordingly to the customers. So I would think that there's plenty of opportunities there, and probably saturation is not exactly a worry that we have to think about at this moment.
Great, thank you both. Another quick question here. I'll take this on because I think, Mike, maybe you might have some thoughts, but I like it because it's a hard question, which is, distribution utilities have suggested mechanisms for ensuring reliability for distribution-connected energy storage systems. Does the utility need to have oversight in the interconnection and during the operation of these units, or only on interconnection? This is probably a good reason to tune in to the DER Technical Conference that is happening April 10th to 11th at FERC on DER issues in wholesale markets, but I would just suggest right now that certainly our understanding is that distribution utilities are already, have interconnection processes associated with any assets that might be injecting onto their systems anyway, and so that is going to continue to exist. In terms of the transmission and the distribution system coordination issues, I think that there are two things here. The first is that if you're talking about front-of-meter systems, then we are already seeing front-of-meter distribution connected systems participating and looking to participate in the markets. I don't know how much that changes. For behind-the-meter assets, that obviously could be a different set of considerations, but fundamentally this is something that I think will also be answered in greater detail as folks go forward and are implementing this as well. Mike, do you have any further thoughts you want to add to that?
Yeah, that was well put, Jason. I would just add my own personal experience operating a storage resource connected at distribution. The distribution utility was involved in the interconnection, but not in the operation, and that resource was participating in the ISO wholesale market. So at least one data point sort of giving an example on that. But to be clear, this Order 841 really didn't address that, but Jason, as you said, there will be more discussion around that. And I've heard that issue raised in a lot of other stakeholder proceedings around the U.S., so certainly that is a conversation happening in a lot of places.
Thanks, Mike. Another quick question. What is the worst case scenario with the rehearing requests? Is there a possibility that the order be revoked or simply face additional delays? I'll just take that on. FERC can grant a motion for rehearing, and that motion for rehearing could end up with a completely different outcome than the actual Order 841 that has been put forward. It is possible. Given the unanimous passage of Order 841, I would be a bit surprised by such an outcome. It is more likely that if there's rehearing, it's on a certain set of issues, and that would have to work through a docketed process at FERC. In terms of delays, my understanding is that implementation, the compliance filings would not be delayed necessarily. They would still be asked for while that motion for rehearing is worked out, but FERC could, of course, say something in the in reopening the rehearing as well that could change that. I think the other thing to note here is even in the case that FERC does not grant a motion for rehearing, there's a chance that some of these motions for rehearing are a preview of potential litigation, and so that is also something that is possible down the line here. Again, I would recommend folks attend our on-site workshop where we will be discussing these issues with a bit more of legal expertise as well. So do come to that. It gives me great pain that it is the end of the hour, and so I would just like to once again thank our speakers today, Mike Berlinski of Customized Energy Solutions, Judy Chang of the Brattle Group, and once more remind all of you who are on today's call that I think coming to Boston, in addition to working on Order 841 strategy and talking to members of the industry, will be a also really fun time. So please join us in Boston. And otherwise, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. Hope to have you again soon on our next educational webinar on energy storage and policy. Cheers, everyone. Thanks again.